Hi, this is Swapnil Bharti, and we are here in San Francisco to cover DockerCon, and today we have once again Patrick. Patrick, we meet so much, you should become a regular. We should just start, a weekly or monthly show, Swapnil with Patrick, and we just talk about all these technologies.
I see you more often than my friends, so yeah, definitely. There's lots of action in the container space, and I think you saw that at the conference today.
Yeah, so when we look at like the keynote, there are like so many exciting, announcements were happening. And of course, everything was federated application platform was in, but
that's a big deal.
But the desktop, that was kind of magic that was happening there, and I was like, wow, that was great. So, what kind of work was done there, and most importantly, why?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that. The notion behind adding a graphical user interface behind desktop is that Docker's culture and design goals has always been to make things easy. Solomon talked about that in previous keynotes. Docker is super easy to use for people who like the command line. But what we heard from lots of our enterprise customers when they start using Docker is that there's a whole population of developers and IT pros who are used to graphical user interfaces and are very productive with that. And so we thought we would expand the range of people who have access to containers, make them more, democratize them with a GUI on top of desktop. So we have lots of people who are using Docker Desktop already, more than 1 million in the past year, as Gareth said in the keynote. And we said, let's add a UI, a user interface that would let people create applications from scratch, either from templates that other people would have created, or with custom services, but where they don't have to mess with the command line, doing everything in a UI. And that's what you saw in the demo this morning. So we're still working on that project, and it will be productized at some point. One of the big axes of development that we're still working on is first, like finishing the project where there's still a lot of aspects of what you can specify in a compose file that still need to be filled out, like specifying volumes and networks and things like that in the UI. And there's another aspect which is very interesting to me, which is about collaboration. How can developers collaborate and share these templates and these applications? So there's lots of work that you're going to see us doing in the next few months on that.
When you mentioned collaboration, when I look at collaboration, I always look at open source collaboration. So how much of this work will be open sourced?
So that I don't know. So that's a question you should ask Gareth. So that's part of the Docker Desktop team user interface. Okay. But the collaboration I'm talking about is not necessarily open source collaboration on source code.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This is really about developers in the enterprise, sharing their applications. Sometimes you have the most advanced developers who are going to create these templates for these stacks, and then maybe there's one of them who's going to do that, and then 100 of the developers in the enterprise who are going to leverage them.
Yeah, so that's totally takes us back to Docker Hub, because Docker Hub allowed people, to just upload their, whole. So, of course, it's in very early phases, but how do you plan to build a repository of templates? Is it like private, or there will be a cloud-based, service where people can upload?
So that's all these questions. I don't think we have a clear answer on them. That's why we didn't talk about that. That's kind of an early development.
But this is the kind of.
This is going in that direction, definitely. Exactly. So I don't know what kind of features there will be on Hub for that. We talked about integration with Docker Enterprise Edition. That means Docker Trusted Registry. Okay. If you're behind the firewall in a corporation, you're going to share these templates and these applications, but with your colleagues, not with the whole world. Right. And there will be role-based access control that's tied to that and all this. So there are still lots of product aspect to work in there. Right.
And before we're sitting down, we're putting the microphones and everything. You talked about some new areas that you're working on.
Yeah.
it's not just about edge. You were talking about space, and you're talking machine learning. And and you threw a lot of keywords at me. It's so many that I could not even. So you just on the camera, tell us, what's going on in that space.
Sure. So my role in that conference this year was to help Gareth prepare for the developer keynote that you saw this morning. But also, I've been the chair for 2 tracks, Black Belt and Innovation. And then my role was also to organize the Cool Hack session at the end. And both in the Innovate track and the Cool Hack session, I saw some trends forming there. And the trends are these. Containers are everywhere right now. What you saw in the keynote this morning is that people want still a hybrid cloud between on-prem, multi-cloud, on-premise, and managing all that. But we're seeing that happening in the pretty short term. But then the next stage, what is it with containers? And the next stage, what I've seen from our early adopters is really a lot of different use cases for containers that are very innovative. And I'd say there are 3 categories that I'm most excited about. The first one is what we call edge. That means running containers not only in the data center, but at the edge. And so in the Innovate track, if you go look at the agenda, you'll see there are some sessions by people like Siemens, or people who are working with Siemens for industrial IoT. You have people from General Electric who are showing industrial IoT use cases where they're running containers at the edge. My favorite use case for edge is in the Cool Hack session that you'll see tomorrow evening. It's Chris Heilstand from the Johns Hopkins laboratory. He's working with NASA on NASA's planetary defense mission. And the goal of the NASA planetary defense mission is to defend the Earth against asteroids. And he's going to talk about a project that he's working on called DART, the Double Asteroid Redirect Mission, where their goal is literally to send
containers towards it.
No, so they're going to send a spacecraft a million miles from here, target it at an asteroid, and try to change its trajectory. And so the spacecraft is going to hit the asteroid at 6 kilometers per second, and there will be what they call a selfie satellite that's going to take pictures of all that, then send that back to Earth in order to understand what we could do in order to change the trajectory of an asteroid. Now, what Chris is talking about today is that developing for space is very complicated. The hardware is very expensive. And so they have more developers than they have hardware for testing and developing all that software. And so he's explaining how they became much more agile for space development by using Docker and Docker Compose and virtualizing the hardware. So they're making simulation of the actual hardware that goes in space, and they're able to develop on a laptop. He's going to show that. So that's a really cool use case, talking about edge, million miles away from Earth. So that's one use case, edge, which I think is big. The second one is AI and machine learning. So artificial intelligence and machine learning. We've seen a lot of use of that since the TensorFlow paper by Google in 2015. Now what we're seeing this year is people who start to do distributed TensorFlow on top of Kubernetes. And there's a super interesting project by Google that's called Kubeflow that formalizes all that. And so David Aronczyk, who's a Google product manager in charge of the TensorFlow, in charge of the Kubeflow project, is going to present that in the Cool Hack session. So that's another area where I see lots of use of containers, and that touches the areas of GPUs and high-speed interconnect when you're running that on-premise in HPC environments and things like that. And one of my colleagues is also having a talk on that, Docker for HPC. So that's second area, AI and ML. And the third area is serverless. We've seen lots of hype about serverless, but that was last year. This year, we have customers who come to ask us, what serverless framework should I run on top of Docker EE? And there are like more than 10 of them. We'll have a panel with 5 of them who came at DockerCon, and they're going to talk about the state of serverless, the difference between proprietary serverless from the different cloud providers, Azure Functions, Google Cloud Function, and Amazon Lambda, and the 10 serverless frameworks that run on top of Kubernetes and that are part of the Cloud Native Foundation Serverless Working Group. We're going to work with the Serverless Working Group to come up with a benchmark. And in the closing keynote, there's one of my favorite projects from this year, which is by Edith Levin. The project is called Glue. And what Glue is doing, it's an open source project that lets you glue together traditional applications running on a container infrastructure, microservices and serverless, whether it's portable serverless like FN or Nucleo or OpenWhisk or one of these projects running on top of your kube cluster, either on-prem or in the cloud, as well as Amazon Cloud Functions or Amazon Lambda, Azure Functions or Google Cloud Functions. So Glue is this serverless gateway that understands the functions that it's talking to, and that's able to do API translation between REST and gRPC. It's using Envoy behind the scenes, and it lets you use serverless for modernizing your traditional application. So it's a very good combo with Docker Enterprise Edition. So these are, to me, the three trends that I see at Docker. At DockerCon this year of new kind of use cases for containers. The first one is edge, second one is machine learning, and the third one is serverless.